So, a sermon on Leviticus. Are you nervous? Leviticus is not necessarily the place that we go to preach the gospel, is it? Let's be honest. Leviticus has a terrible reputation. If you ask most people what book that they would like to get rid of in the entire Bible, it would probably be Leviticus. I mean, the book is all about animal sacrifice and priestly ministry and purity laws and moral issues that seem to be so far afield from our current context that we have a difficult time identifying with anything that is said within it. So why is this book in our canon? Does this stuff matter? Does it matter at all? I believe it does, and let me tell you why. Sometimes we can look so closely at the minutia of Scripture that it can blur the overall purpose of Scripture itself. I think we do that in Leviticus. We look so closely at the laws and dismiss them for not having any relevancy for us today, thereby blurring the overall purpose of Leviticus itself. But looking at the purpose rather than the minutia of Leviticus, perhaps we can discover its place in our faith story and how we can preach the good news of God that is spread throughout the pages of the entire Bible. If we zoom out for just a moment and take a look at Leviticus in context, we can discover something different about Leviticus. So we are going to start wide, and we are going to go specific. Of course, you know that Leviticus exists within the half of the Bible that we call the Old Testament. And I'm sure you probably know that the word testament derives from the Latin testamentum. The Hebrew word from which the Latin is translated is the word berit, defined as an agreement based on legal terms. But the Hebrew idea of covenant goes far beyond mere obligation. To covenant with someone in Hebrew culture meant to commit to someone or to be in relationship with them. Therefore, covenant is a relational term. As you know, however, every relationship requires obligations, norms, and commitments if the relationship is going to survive. Think of a marriage. A marriage will not be successful if each member is not committed to each other and to the obligations of their relationship. A marriage requires fidelity and a promise to treat each other with dignity and with respect. Israel's relationship with God holds similar obligations like those found in Leviticus. All the laws in Leviticus represent a promise of fidelity, a promise built upon God's deliverance of Israel from Egypt and Israel's commitment to covenant life. Are you making the connections? These laws in Leviticus are more about relationship than they are about moral uprightness and perfection. And they are especially not about an Old Testament God of stingy grace. You see, I think the problem that we have with the Old Testament, and Leviticus specifically, is often a symptom that reveals that we don't understand covenant. We don't understand this communal faith journey that goes through both testaments. We think of Leviticus as irrelevant and lacking in grace. But thinking of Leviticus as marriage vows written to a lover flies in the face of those connotations. If we look more closely at Leviticus itself, we find that Leviticus supports this perspective. So let's take a closer look. Leviticus can be divided into two main sections. Chapters 1 through 16 speak of the sacrificial and priestly ministry of Israelite religion. That is the cultic ritual. Chapters 17 through 26, on the other hand, are what scholars call the Holiness Code. The Holiness Code incorporates much of the laws that we think of when we think of Leviticus. The laws include laws about sex and food and cultic celebrations and neighborliness. The heart of the Holiness Code is Leviticus 19:2. Speak to all the congregations of the people and say to them, "You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." At this point, you might be thinking, this is exactly why I hate Leviticus. All these laws, all of these expectations, they only serve to make me as perfect as God. I'm not perfect. I can't be that perfect. I can't meet these expectations. I don't have it in me to follow these laws. But let's take a step back for just a second and investigate what exactly is going on in this verse. The term holy means that which is marked off, separated, or withdrawn from ordinary use. God, by very definition, is holy. More than any other term, holiness gives expression to the essential nature of the sacred as the innermost reality of God. What is truly beautiful about this passage is that God invites us to participate in God's holiness. Be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. God, the holy other, invites us into God's very self. God is inviting us to truly covenant with him, and the laws in Leviticus give us knowledge, as conceptual as they may be, of the holy. See, what I'm saying is that Leviticus and the rest of the Old Testament provide a gateway for humanity to enter into the divine. Leviticus is part of a love story between God and humanity. Now, this sermon probably wasn't what you were expecting. A love story from the book of Leviticus? But that is exactly where Leviticus calls us. It calls us to see God's great love for us and to teach us how to respond. So what this study of Leviticus teaches us is that law, duty, obligation, discipline, discipleship, these things are not antithetical to our relationship to God. They are part of the love story between God and humanity. Our discipline and commitment to God is how we participate in God. Or rather, it can be. The obligations taken on their own without relationship is just a dry and irrelevant old book. That is how we see Leviticus, isn't it? And when we focus in our own lives on nothing but obligations, we are not living a love story. We are living a dry old story that once had life, but that no longer does. What a cautionary tale to us as seminarians. The papers that we write and the sermons that we preach and the presentations that we give all have the potential to be an expression of that love story. I don't know about you, though. I often let those things distract me from my relationship with God. The obligations can dominate and drown out the purpose of why I am here, which is, of course, because I fell in love. I think that is why we are all here. We fell in love. In almost 3 months, we will leave Sewanee. Within perhaps 4 or 5 months, we will all spread throughout the nation to do the work that God has given us to do, to be priests in the church. We will teach with our words, but we will also teach by example the love story that we know to be true. By walking in love and fidelity with God, the smallest and most ordinary things will be made holy and great in our lives and in our ministries. That is the place where God will open and flower within us. That is the place where we will make God truly known in the world, because everyone knows when you are in love, you want to sing it from the mountains. You want to tell everybody in the world your story. And that is what we are called to do, to live and to preach the love story that is spread throughout the pages of the entire Bible, and that it is written on our hearts. Amen.